Dr. Sophie Sterling, and I'm an intuitive psychologist to Black and brown women in business, and I'm new around here, so if you benefit from this video in any way at all, I would really appreciate it if you would like and subscribe below. Today I was going to talk to you about generational trauma and how it gets passed on. I think it's one of the things that comes up a lot with the women that I work with, especially around this idea of, I know better now, I understand these things, I understand kind of how things have come to be and why things have been the way that they are, but these patterns are still showing up in my life. I'm trying to make these changes, I'm trying to do things differently, and it's just not happening. Like I've found myself repeating the same cycles or the same patterns that have happened for generations and generations before me. And it can be a really frustrating place to be. So I feel you. And so I wanted to just share these ways of how generational trauma can get passed on, because I think it can be really quite validating and helpful to understand these processes, so that, we're not just blaming ourselves and thinking there's something wrong with us, right, for not being able to just completely undo all of the stuff that we've been experiencing, often for centuries. So the first way in which intergenerational trauma can get passed on that I wanted to talk about is kind of through environmental factors. So it probably goes without saying, right, that when a land or an area or community is experiences trauma in some way. So, the extreme end of this might be something like war, invasion, colonization, genocide, that future generations are going to inherit that, right? The future generations born to that land, born to that area, are going to inherit that in some way. And, some of those examples that I gave, we are still currently experiencing in our world in 2024, which is mad. But it's still going on in lots of places. And so even if there were to, by some miracle, be a ceasefire across the world today, as I speak in May 2024, it would likely, still take generations and generations to heal from what has taken place, and that includes things like for the land to be regenerated, for buildings and infrastructure to be rebuilt, air quality even, that has a huge impact, and connection, within communities, between people, that will likely take generations and generations to get back to a place of just feeling safe and feeling that you can trust the next person and all of that kind of thing. And so it's, as I'm speaking, you can probably feel and hear just how much of an impact that kind of thing has. And we, not only is it still ongoing across the world, but lots of other places are still recovering from that having had taken place, years and years and years ago. And so a lot of the kind of examples that I'm going to give, you will often hear people say, maybe not very well informed people say, that was years ago, or that was centuries ago, like you just need to get over it now, why are you still talking about it? Actually, this is why, like we recognize that these things, this trauma, really does change everything. It destroys everything, on every level. And so we see the effects of it for many, 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 many generations and many centuries often after the thing has happened. So that's the first one. The second one is around genetics and epigenetics, this idea of epigenetics. So there's an increasing amount of research to demonstrate that traumatic experiences can alter our gene expression, essentially. So that means that it not only alters our gene expression, but the generations to come. So, the children that we give birth to, can be born with that same genetic expression. So, for example, as a woman, we may have repeated examples of men being violent, just as an example, right? Of course, that is a huge type of trauma, right? And what can happen is our body, as a way of trying to protect us. Our bodies are very, very clever. I don't subscribe at all to this idea of our bodies attacking us in any way or kind of going against us in any way. I do believe that everything that develops in our bodies or is shown to us in our bodies is information. It's trying to kind of guide us towards something, or it's trying to protect us from something, or whatever it might be. So as a way of protecting us, it might develop a stress response. So a stress response is a mechanism that our body uses, in order to fight or flee, right? I know those are just a couple of examples of what might happen when we feel we're in danger. But it's an attempt to kind of, help us to survive in that situation. So what can happen is that stress response is encoded into our genetic expression and becomes associated with men, let's just say, in that example. And again, because it's about safety, it gets passed on to the next generation because it wants our next generation to stay safe. It wants our children to stay safe. So it's kind of like, be careful when you're in this situation, or be careful when you're around this type of person, or be careful, we need to allow you to be able to be activated in that situation so that you can run away, or you can fight, or you can do something that's going to keep you safe or protect you, keep you alive. So again, very helpful. The purpose is very helpful, but as you can probably imagine, as I'm saying that, it can become problematic when we or our future generations are faced with, for example, men who are actually safe, like our sons. So the third way that intergenerational trauma can be passed on that I wanted to talk about is like cultural, social, and communication factors. I'm going to put them all in one for this. And this is essentially the stories that we're told, right? So we are meaning-making beings. And stories are a huge part of that, and also a potentially healing part of that as well, part of how we are as humans. I think there can be huge healing within stories and stories being passed down, and it's actually a huge part of the work that I do as well. But there's another side, right? And also we can kind of inherit this trauma by the stories that we are being told. And so often when something is experienced as traumatic, the story that is told can be something that contributes to the maintenance of the trauma cycles. And I think birth is actually a really good example of this, because there is definitely a narrative of it being extremely painful, dangerous, life-threatening even. And many of us will relate to hearing stories of, how somebody we know nearly died, even maybe our own mothers. And that's kind of the more extreme end of things, but even just all of the other things that come within those stories, like the extreme pain and damage that's been done and stitches required. I know that those kinds of stories were definitely told to me by my own mum over the years. Many reminders of how difficult it was to bring me and my brother into the world. But that stuff has an impact. And I do have to say that we know the medical industrial birth complex has a lot to answer for. So I'm not negating the part they have to play in it, and that's a whole other video. Right, that's a whole other video, or 5. The system has a lot to answer for in terms of how they treat birth, in terms of how they treat women, all of that stuff. That is absolutely a thing. And Black and brown women especially, I will say, we know that from the stats and all of that stuff. And however, I can say from experience 3 times, that so much of the fear that I experienced in my own births was because of the stories, essentially, right? And we know that fear does not lend itself to a relaxed, cooperative body and a smooth birth. We can see that in animals, animals who are not feeling safe, who are, they will try and run away. They will try to get to safety in order to give birth, or they just won't, they just won't. They won't give birth. And that's, when we tend to see complications and things happen. And so that's exactly what tends to happen. Like I said, the system does play its part, a huge part, and I'm not dismissing that. But also our fear, which can often be inherited through the stories, contribute to traumatic births. We do end up having traumatic births, and then it kind of just continues that cycle on, because then we have traumatic stories to tell, and we're passing them on and passing them on, and it's quite easy to see how that continues. And the fourth and last way that I wanted to talk about in terms of intergenerational trauma being passed on is quite simply behavioural patterns. And essentially, this is just the modelling of behaviour from one generation to the next. So a big one I see, especially related to business, and the work that I do with women who have businesses or want to start businesses, is related to money habits, right? So if we, for example, grew up with parents who overspent, maybe had a lack of systems, or knowledge around how to manage money to ensure a sense of financial security and safety, we are more likely to do the same, than somebody who didn't experience that growing up. Or, and this is, I see this a lot, and I call it flip-flopping. There's probably a way more technical word for it, and I will look at it after this video. But I call it flip-flopping, and it's where we kind of consciously decide to do the complete opposite, usually of our caregivers, as a way of attempted improvement, of doing something different in some way, and having a hopefully very different outcome. But what we actually end up doing, and you might relate to this, is that we end up creating the same issue or energy around that thing, which often tends to be unsafety or a sense of unsafety. So with the money example, it might look like hoarding money, underspending, kind of living way below our means in a way that still doesn't feel that great, actually. Maybe feels quite limited, it feels very fearful, and is also still quite potentially traumatic for a child growing up, within that household or within that environment. And so then they might go on and make the decision, I'm going to do things, when they become adults, I'm going to do things completely differently. And, I've got my own money now. And then they kind of they flip-flop, right? They go to the other way. They go to the way of our parents, where they're overspending and they're, being frivolous with money and all of that kind of stuff. And so as you can see across generations, we kind of flip-flop from one extreme to the other, but what we're left with is the same. It's the same energy. It's the same sense of unsafety, instability, or whatever it might be around that thing. And so you might say, well, what's the solution then? It's not one way or the other. And the solution is balance. I guess it's somewhere in the middle. And the way we get there, in my experience, is through true healing. That is, so that we are able to just move forwards, from a place that is more conscious and empowered, essentially. So as I said at the start of this video, if you found any of this helpful, please do like and subscribe. I might also put some links below as to kind of how else you might be able to follow me, get in touch with me, and find out more about what I do, how I work, and what I offer. All right, thanks for listening. I'll see you soon.